Welcome, everyone. Today is February 28th, 2023. This is the Finance Committee meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order with a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the
United States of America,
Republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God,
indivisible,
with liberty
for all.
and justice for all. This meeting is being held remotely in accordance with the Governor of Massachusetts, March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, GLC 30A, Section 20, and on June 16, 2021, the governor signed an act relative to extending the COVID-19 measure.
Gary needs to mute.
Mute.
There we go.
Adopted during the state of emergency. This meeting is being recorded. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. So we have two topics on our agenda tonight, and we'll go in a little bit reverse order. So we were going to talk about the town budget that came from the select board last week. And the second item on our agenda was to really go over the override and talk about a plan, the timetable, and figuring out steps on who does what, and so we can participate in proceeding this along in a successful path. So I wanted to start off with, I sent everyone, we had some conversations last week about trying to understand really where are we with the override, and some comments were suggested that we weren't proceeding along, and that and we are only how many weeks away, 5-6 weeks away from town meeting, and so we do have a lot to do in the next several weeks in order to get information out to the public and firm things up. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, I put some ideas on an override plan that I sent to everyone, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And then since Shauna's here, we can talk to Shauna about where things are on the select board side and go from there. Oops, someone's trying to come in. 1 second. Okay, great. So did everyone get a chance to look at the override plan that I had sent along? Good. Okay. No? Okay. So
Yes.
Great. Thank you. So I was trying to go through and think about, well, what, let's define what we all feel are the biggest hurdles for this override. And then from there, figure out a plan of attack to address those hurdles and figure out what to do. And then really who's going to do that? Who's going to participate in those roles? And my quick analysis of, not quick analysis, but I seem to think about this every minute, but the biggest challenge I think that we have for the override is the demonstration of the need, right? So I think we've been through it. We're in the weeds of all the numbers, and I think we can demonstrate internally what the needs are, but we need to come across and demonstrate the needs to the general public. So we need documents, we need educational materials, we need things. And the sooner we get those things, the sooner we can get them out to the general public. So we're not at town meeting allowing people to hear things really for the first time. So, so that's to me one of the biggest hurdles that we have. The second biggest hurdle that I see is really maintaining the credibility of the town officials. So I'm not at all indicating that town officials are not credible, but we need to be credible. So we as town officials, once we put a plan together, so the select board, the school committee, the finance committee, we need a plan, and then we need to stick to the plan. So we need to be clear what the intention is of the override, and then we need to stick to it. I think we all have heard feedback about in the past, certain things, well, the town says this and then they do that. And so, we want to, I think in order for this to really be addressed, we need to really come up with a plan, stick to the plan, and honor ourselves and maintain that credibility. the third issue with the override is really what the tax bill impact is going to be, right, to the town resident. So there's not much we can do about that. That's each individual sensitivity to taxes and what their perceived benefit is going to be on those taxes. But that certainly is a hurdle. We can clearly demonstrate what the tax rate effect is going to be for them, but that's a question for themselves. Then the fourth thing is really taking all of these things and who's going to drive this process from where we are now to the end. And, you know, again, in the plan that I set forth that we can talk about, I try to chunk it down into tasks, and then we as a committee in conjunction with the select board can determine where we go with this, if everyone sort of agrees with some of my tasks, or if people have other ideas to deal with. But anyone have any comments on that before I get more specific? Cindy, go ahead. Thank you.
Well, I think one of the issues, it's going to be difficult for us to ascertain which one of these options in phasing in an override, if it were passed, which one is the right one to go. As far as your first comment, your second comment about the credibility and sticking to whatever it is that we agree upon, it's hard to do that without knowing how we would allocate an override budget. We haven't seen a good plan with that. I'm additionally concerned by, I guess, the news that perhaps broke today, yesterday, whatever, that the new estimated cherry sheet is out. And we're going to get even more money. I mean, it looks like if the governor's plan goes through, and they're pretty confident once they start putting estimates on cherry sheets that they send out to the communities, it's an additional 400,000, 450. So combined with the free cash that we have and with the additional revenue, top line revenue that Jim can allocate through the budget, it's going to be a much more difficult sell, because now it looks like, well, what's the problem? And we all know what the problem is. You know, it's a structural deficit. I get that, but it's a little bit hard when you've got so much money left over. So I think our challenge is even greater than it was in the past, because before we had nothing left over. Our pockets were empty at the end of the day. There was nothing left over. Now it looks like we're going to have a little bit left over, not for the right things, you know, that it's going to be a little bit more difficult to allocate to the operating budget these one-time revenues. But it looks like we're going to have a pretty good pot. If someone were to bring up ARPA funds combined with that, then it's, what do you need more money for? So I think that's what we have to be prepared for as well, is that we're sitting on a pretty good chunk of change right now that we haven't been in the past. And if we're going to go forward with this, I think we have to be prepared for that.
Mm-hmm. No, that's absolutely. And then this becomes part of our educational materials. And Hugh, I'll let you speak in 1 second, but the cherry sheets came out, it's the governor's budget. So there's more steps along the path. So even though the governor's budget has a more favorable revenue, I think we got a long way to go as it goes down through all the committees before that's known. So I wouldn't spend the money yet. But you're right. So however it lands.
It's no different than the estimated cherry sheet that they send to us earlier in the year. I mean, this is our estimated cherry sheet they're sending out. You know, and it's mostly Chapter 70 money that the big bulk of the increase is in. It's Chapter 70.
Well, I think it has to go through other, there's more committees that it needs to go through.
Right. But what I'm saying is that this is the same process that it would go through any time of the year, that once they send out the estimated cherry sheets, typically they don't vary too much from that because they know people are preparing budgets on that. So if we can't wait until July. Mm-hmm. We'll never get the final number until the end of July, June, July. So I think it's pretty close. And I get what you're saying, Karen, that it's an estimate, but it's the same estimate that we always base our
No,
annual revenues on.
I think usually there's one more round that goes through. I don't know if it's the
Okay.
Senate or that, and that's from my recollection, the governor's budget is usually more optimistic than future as it goes through. But good point. Let's continue
Yeah,
on.
okay,
and
okay.
keep going on that. So, Hugh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm with Cindy. I mean, my question to start with was going to be, what do we know about the budget and so forth? I would disagree with you, Karen, only because we have a Democratic governor, the Democratic House and Senate. In the past, the budget proposed has been by a Republican governor. So you start off with an opposition approach to things. No longer the case. We know the government, the state house, has been awash in money for the past year or two, and they've been keeping it largely to themselves or not to us. So I didn't know what the figure was, but having heard that we've now had a significant increase in state aid, some of my complaints about the state being parsimonious as far as we're concerned, and some of Albert's analysis about how we stand with everybody else may be a little questionable. Now, if that's the case, talking about credibility, etc., it might be wise to reconsider, because if we have the money to deal with the things we're talking about, then there are a lot of people who will ask just the question Cindy was talking about. So we might want to reconsider.
Reconsider the override?
Yes.
Okay, so let me
Because
just,
the reason for the override is to have money to do what we need to do. And if we've got the money, that we can't guarantee the future. However,
so assume, okay, so let's just back up for a second. So assuming those numbers are relatively final, right? So that's an assumption. That's $400,000 more to the budget that was planned. So that does not solve the budget crisis that the town is in. So that doesn't get us there.
but that's the analysis, and that has to be taken into account. It has to be documented as to what the results are with that money. I don't for a moment think that the legislature is going to make major changes to their brand new Democratic governor's budget. The effects of what it will be for us is another matter. That's perfectly appropriate for analysis and where we are and what we're missing and what we have to have. But I wouldn't throw bombs at the projected amounts from the state.
So certainly in our next part of the exercise, right? So we're going to look at the select board budget where it stood. We can certainly elect to add additional state revenue if we feel that that's appropriate, and see where that that lands within the budget. Finance committee is certainly not ready to finalize the budget at this time, but we can certainly add those dollars in and see where that takes us. Zach, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, I guess I have a couple of questions that might lead into some other topics. One would be, I'm kind of unfamiliar with the cherry sheet. I've read the page and I kind of understand it's money coming from the governor's budget. How often do we receive money from that fund? That's an annual. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So the budget is voted on in late June or early July, and that's the budget for the year.
Okay. How many years ahead are we ultimately forecasting budgets? 1 year.
Yep. So this budget is for fiscal 24. So that starts July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2024.
And we have data from what we received from the governor's budget from the last couple of years.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So, kind of back to something that was mentioned last week or the week before, I think it was last week, was kind of like a 5-year forecasting or a 5-year look ahead. I feel there could be inconsistency with the funding that comes from there. And my thought is, if we're going to if the override is needed, we could kind of project what our budget's looking like in 5 years. So if we need to push on the side that the override is needed, we can kind of point at the inconsistency of the funds that were coming from this source and kind of get in the mind frame of like a 5-year forecast, because we're trying to get away from the Band-Aid, and the Band-Aid happens when we're just trying to make it through the next year.
Mhm.
It's kind of my thought.
Yeah, no, good thoughts. And the analysis, the finance committee's memo that I put together last year really goes into extreme depth from the state aid in terms of what they've paid us over, I think it was a 13-year period. And presuming, now we're in a 14-year period, and I estimated it again. So the average rate of growth over the 14-year period has been less than 1% per year. And so when you look at inflation, or you just look at, normal 2.5%, 3% increases, the state aid has been a significant issue for the town of Westport and continues to be. But that's definitely part of educational information that needs to go out. But state aid has definitely been a big issue and been lacking. So even with, a couple of 100,000 potentially more, it's still pretty anemic from,
Yeah, I'm trying to, take the standpoint of being very objective opposed to subjective. And with just a couple simple questions and facts to back it up, we can hash this out quick. Like, what are we asking? What are we doing with the money for the override? And then how much do we need? And then with the data, we can just simply explain it. There's no opinions needed.
Yeah, I mean, I try to do everything in the documents I do. There's no opinions, it's factual information. And then someone has to make their own determination, but absolutely it's all factual.
Yeah, and I guess just the last thing is, I wasn't saying that there was subjectivity in your data. I was saying for the mass that we have to educate. There's always a pushback. What, more money? Why? And then that's when you get into the difficult conversations that everybody on this call understands, but that's not who we need to help provide the town with what the town needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Zach. Shauna, you've got your hand out. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to address what we were talking about earlier. So the governor's budget is usually, they don't deviate that much from it. Once we get the governor's budget, it's usually pretty consistent. However, we've had a pretty consistent governor for a number of years. And so there was like Hugh was saying, it's hard to tell with a new governor if that's going to stand, but it's a Democratic governor, so it probably will. So while you can't 100% rely on whatever the governor's budget is at this point, I think it's probably the best number you're going to get. You guys were throwing around numbers, but the gain in the governor's budget over what Jim had been using when we finalized the budget is $563,000. So it's more than what you guys were saying. It's $563,000. Now, my personal opinion, just me, is that we take that $500,000 more that it is and use that to supplement the school budget instead of free cash to supplement the school budget. So my opinion would be that the select board budget would largely be unchanged. It's just that it would no longer need to use free cash for the school department. But that's just me.
Yeah. No, thanks, Shauna. And that would be my approach too. So if 500,000 and 563, that's net of assessments as well. So is that a net number?
Yes. Yeah, that's the net number.
Yeah, that would be my opinion as well, that 563 would come in, 54% would be for the school, and then that would lessen the need for any free cash that
that wasn't what I said. I said 500 would go to the school.
Oh, that's not what I'm thinking.
That's what I said.
That's not what I'm thinking, but okay. Hugh, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Shauna's touched on something I meant to mention and talk about. We talked about in passing, but we have the sheet that showed the figures, assuming a 3 million override over years, et cetera. What maybe Shauna has or someone has somewhere, or maybe if it doesn't exist, it needs to be created, is how that would be proposed to be shared among the different budgets. Everybody's touched on that, but maybe it exists. If it doesn't, I think it should. Do we add a couple of people to the highway department? Do we add finance the police and fire we've been talking about? I'm not suggesting those are what we have to do, but I think the combination of, we've been talking about pointing out to people what happens without money, but we also need to point out to them what would happen if we had the money, I suggest. So does it exist? And that's really my question.
Karen, can I answer that?
Please do.
So the select board at the last select board meeting directed the town administrator to, do you guys have this spreadsheet, this override numbers 22823?
Mm-hmm.
So we directed the town administrator to present to us the what is in that tab is the town administrator initial recommendation. So that was only appropriate 1 million of the we wanted a $3 million override. Everybody has agreed with a $3 million override. But what we directed him to do was only to use 1 million in year one, and then another million in year two, and then another million in year three. And what we said is we wanted 250,000 to the, I think it was 250,000 to stabilization, and then 750,000 split 54-46 between the town and the school. So that was what we directed him to draft a warrant article that said that. And then he, of course, the warrant article would have to further divide the town budget into, the appropriate departments. So it would be things like, you're right, we need to say, but it would be things like restoring the firefighter position we lost, restoring highway position we lost, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
I personally have since changed my mind about what I think the warrant article should be. So you're right, there's confusion about that, because even me, who I thought I knew what I wanted to do, have I've changed my mind. I now believe we should appropriate the whole 3 million right at the beginning, that we should take 1.5 million and put it in stabilization, 1.5 million to budget 54-46 of the town. That's my personal opinion. I think the town might not need that much in year one, but the school does need that much in year one. But we owe it to you to give you the warrant articles after our next meeting on March 6th. So I really do appreciate input from this group about how do we appropriate all 3 million in year one? Do we put some in stabilization, and then how do we split it for the town and the school? I would love your wisdom on that.
I would respond to that. I agree with you that we should do it at once rather than spread it out. But I think classically, I never know where it came from, but there's been a 54 schools, 46, if my arithmetic's right, town. I don't see why that gets deviated from, because it's, for whatever reason, it's the historical approach, and you can argue either side up and down, which really won't change anything. I would hate to see a further motion to move that proportion away from the town, because we know there's a significant feeling in some quarters that an override and such is a waste of time, because we'll never see the money. It all goes to the schools. That is not true, but we need to make sure that it is viewed as being fairly apportioned.
Yeah. So, I appreciate the draft that shows the phase in of 1 million a year, and I think that's helpful to the taxpayer, right? So the taxpayer is not burdened all up front. But I think in part it does get more confusing to the taxpayers, and if we've determined 3 million is the need, then we should demonstrate what the need is and ask for the need and get the money as, quickly as possible so that it can start to restore the departments. Because part of my question, exactly what you said, Shauna, on the list, if it was a phase-in approach that would show, in assuming the 54% split to the school, that gives them 405,000, which doesn't solve the school's issue. So, just to recap our numbers, the school budget the school from fiscal 23 to fiscal 24, the school's growth in the budget was 1.67 million. The town, through its normal revenue, is able to fund about $600,000 of that. So there's a $1.1 million gap right now from the school's request to what the town can afford through recurring revenue, right? So the select board recommended 500,000 to temporarily ease that gap, but that gap's real. That gap's going to be there next year. The gap's going to be even bigger. So to put an override through and 400,000 goes to the school doesn't solve anything. So we're going to be in the same situation. We're in a dilemma. So I agree going for the full 3 million so the school can get an appropriate number to support that gap. But what I would like us to see, whatever the number is, that we all have a collective agreement on what this plan is. And I think we should have a written agreement in principle from the select board, the school committee, and the finance committee that this is the plan. These are the numbers that we all have to live with our budgets, and we are not going to supplement future budgets with free cash. I think we need that commitment from all parties because that's what we need to do. We need to be firm that we're asking for an override and this is our plan. And we all stick to it. And that's part of the integrity that I think and credibility that we all need to have. And then we all need to hold ourselves to it. Gary, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. So, I appreciate that we want to sock away $1.5 million into the stabilization fund, but I think if you're going to be asking for an override, it's probably not. We can talk about the amount that we want to put into stabilization, but I think that's pretty high when the departments themselves are struggling with just getting by on a fiscal year basis. To be socking away that kind of money to stabilization, even though it might look good as far as the rating agencies are concerned, I wouldn't agree with that much money. I mean, if we put away 500,000, at least it's a commitment. But the whole point of having this override is to supplement budgets, actual budgets that have the issue. So in my impression is, well, okay, they're looking for a $3 million override, but half of it's going to be socked away in a savings account. So to me, I think we really need to look at what that means. I agree with putting money into the stabilization. I've always been a proponent to that, but I don't agree with the dollar amount. I think that's a little misleading, and we need to maybe revisit that. I think they should go directly to the departments that are suffering and need to fix immediately, and not have to go through town meeting, a 2/3 vote, and then have to vote it out if we need it, which has its own negative impression. That we're actually going into the stabilization because budgets are strapped. So I know this is a lot just we're discussing it, but I feel that that's a little high on the onset.
Do you know what the number should be? Like, do you have a suggestion of the number?
I would say that if we're asking for a $3 million override, that maybe 5 to 10% of that should go into the stabilization, and that we propose that as a we're doing everything we can. We know that in the past the stabilization account has not gotten the funding that it should. Part of this whole process is to get that up to somewhat of us getting back to putting a normal amount in the stabilization account. I mean, we could argue the fact that we want to take some of this money and put it into OPEB. So, but I think the fact of the matter is that and I go back to this, the budgets are actually the ones that are struggling. Stabilization is stabilization. I mean, we're not going to be a AAA community because we dumped $1.5 million into the stabilization account and then, didn't supply the budgets that needed. So I would say somewhere between 5 and 10%, might be a good number. But $1.5 million is, to me, that's kind of high.
Well, keep in mind that if we don't have to supplement the school budget with free cash, assuming that the override goes through and we're not using free cash to supplement the budget,
Yeah.
we're going to have a pretty big balance left in free cash. We're going to have $1 million left. If you take the 760 that the CIPC is recommending, and you take about 400,000 of what I've been told is the estimated warrant items, that's 1.1 million, and we've got about 2.1 million. So we've got a significant balance left in free cash. I know that, there might be some other miscellaneous things that come, but we would still have a lot of money that we could allocate towards stabilization or other funding accounts as a result of that.
Yeah, and not having to go to the override for a stabilization transfer.
Right.
Yeah,
So-
I agree with that. I would agree with funding stabilization through free cash than funding it through an override. Maybe we make a small token of a donation to stabilization, but I agree with Cindy. I think the funding of that should be out of free cash.
So I just want to clarify a little bit on Jim's analysis that's in front of us, and then we're talking about free cash going into the stabilization fund. So it's not a permanent use going into the stabilization fund. What Jim was trying to do was, so you levy the 3 million, but you don't put all of the 3 million into the operating budget, and you put some of it into the stabilization fund, and you grow that for 2-3 years. And then years 4, 5, and 6, you pull it back out to continue to fund the operating budget. Because if you
out of the stabilization account, you mean?
right, so it's temporarily in there. So this way the override can extend for a longer period of time. So if you look at, again, our major source of revenue is only going to grow by 2.5% under Prop 2.5. So if you build all of this into the operating budget and use it now, in 3-4 years, we're going to be at the same point where inflation continues to grow beyond the 2.5%, and we're going to be underwater again. And so the concept is to not use all of the funds right away. So bank some of it temporarily in the stabilization fund, and then year 4, 5, and 6, it comes out to continue to fund the budgets. So
Yeah,
I think
the only risk with that though is we're relying on town meeting to transfer those monies back into the general fund operating budget. That's the risk.
Mhm.
So, and I look at this as, and I keep saying this, but if we're looking for a commitment of 3 million, whatever it is, I would rather see that we know that 3 million is needed for the budget itself, to supplement these budgets. Because the impression could be, well, they want to sock it away, and we're not guaranteed that money's going to come back out and supplement the budgets like we want it to. That's a risk. I mean, that's a tremendous risk. We went through all this, and now we can't transfer the money out. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. I get that. I get what Jim's trying to do. He's trying to hedge us not having to spend the money right now and bank it. But I don't know. That's kind of iffy.
Well, you're right. There's a perception issue where you asked for this money, but you didn't need it. But, I'm a firm believer of building reserves, and by asking for the money and temporarily banking it to say we're going to need it down the road, again, it comes down to the integrity and what the plan is. And so if there's a 5-year plan and you can demonstrate this is how we're going to use it, and I don't want to make up numbers, but if the levy's 3 million and you use 2.5 million and you bank 500,000 each year for 3 years, and then years 4 you start to pull the 500,000 out, that's a plan. There's a demonstrated plan, and there's thoughtfulness, and there's fiscal responsibility to having that plan. So it's a plan. You need to explain it. You need to justify it, and it needs to make sense. And so, it comes with education. But I agree, there's a risk. You're right, Gary. And then there's a risk that it's locked up in the stabilization fund and it can't come out. But so there's risk, but there's also a risk by using the whole 3 million right up front, and then with inflation and everything goes beyond, and then year 4 we're back in the same boat.
I mean, is there, maybe this is a question to Nicole or someone, is there another way to, I don't want to say bank the money, but I mean, it would just keep on falling out the free cash. I mean, that's kind of what would happen, I guess. I think Shauna had a hand. Well, I don't know.
Yeah, Shauna, go ahead, Hugh. And let's just
So I
make this
actually
a
have,
conversation. So
Yeah, so I actually have it. Yes, there is another way to bank that cash. So you're right. If we appropriate all the money, if we tax up to the levy limit without appropriating it, it would go to free cash, right? But the other option that has been floated is to have a specific capital stabilization fund or a capital fund, so that because we use free cash to fund capital purchases, and we don't really have, Zach was talking about a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan. Very difficult to plan if all of your capital purchases are free cash, right? So there has been some suggestion that maybe we should have the stabilization fund, but maybe we should also be funding a capital fund. And I don't know what that looks like. And Gary, you would know more than I do, but that's another place you could put it. You could say this is going to future capital purchases rather than the stabilization fund.
Yeah, you could create a capital stabilization fund. You could also create a collective bargaining stabilization fund that would take care of, potentially take care of future contract increases amongst the unions. So there's different ways, I think, to do it. But then again, it requires a 2/3 vote out at town meeting. So that's always the risk. And I want to just make sure that we're heeding on the side of caution if we do this, because we don't want to do 3 million and all we can really spend is $1 million, and kind of defeated the purpose of the whole act.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Thank you, Gary. Hugh, you've been very patient with your hand up.
Yes. Thank you. Well, there's another couple of things we've been, I think, overlooking a bit. And that is we've deferred things that we have to do or had to. Stabilization, we can add to. I'm with Gary. I think $1.5 million is too much. $500,000, that's fine. That's a savings account. It helps with bonding. We don't have any borrowing in them. We've done the borrowing, I think, we're going to do for a while. But there's also the question of OPB or whatever it is that is sitting off there and needs more funding, which we couldn't afford. Part of what we may do by taking care of some of those things is freeing up future cash that otherwise would have been allocated to those expenses. So it's not direct, but it does indirectly be more cash available in future years. One thing I'm concerned about, and the figures will say what they are, I sort of see a potential for share creep in the school budget. We're talking about 5446. The town, the selectman, the town administrator had an allocation of the funds across the various budgets. The schools don't seem to find themselves constrained by any allocation. So I think that's important. It's an important function of the town. It is not its own community. And if there's an allocation of funds, as there has been in the past, that should be applied. I'm not opposed to the one bailout in a sense this year, as Shauna suggested, or others suggested, the 500,000, but it should not be a base for future expansions, because that would then create a larger and larger share going to a useful operation. Money's fungible. The schools have to adhere to a budget like everybody else has to, and it starts with what the available resources.
Thank you, Hugh. Zach?
I did a little research into what a stabilization fund is, and I understand you're in the context of this discussion, we're talking about it as kind of like a vehicle, but could someone give me a quick definition, quick couple of sentences of what the stabilization fund is?
It's a savings account.
Yeah, it is. It's basically a savings account that the town has available to it. It can only be appropriated from with a 2/3 vote of town meeting. So you have to have a pretty strong cause. as the way I've kind of coined it in the past is if you make $100,000 a year, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sue, what do we have, 1.5 million in stabilization? I think we just lost Sue. I think right now
1.3.
1.3 million. So if you make $100,000 a year, our current savings account has the equivalent of $1,300 in the bank if you make $100,000 a year. And that's it. And we spend every penny of $100,000 that we make. And some years there's a little bonus that we get that's higher than other years. There's enough left over, we can put it in the savings account. So as a town with a $50 million operating budget, we only have $1.3 million tucked away for emergency, for real emergencies. So as a percentage of our operating budget, it's very, very small. Scary small.
Yeah, I think just to it's meant to be, it's a rainy day fund. So,
Right.
you know, just like our own individual worlds, our own lives, right? We should try to save some money in case you get laid off from your job and you need to pay your expenses unanticipated. So, you know, there's been situations, and Gary and Sue, and Hugh, you've been around, and Shauna, where even though the state, as you had asked before, Zach, the state does their budget in July and estimates what state aid is going to be for the year, and that's our budget. But there's been times where there's been economic issues where the state has cut the state aid during the year. So there's been economic issues, and the state said, well, we know we told you we were going to give you that, you know, $7 million, but there were unanticipated economic issues, so we're not giving you those funds anymore. So what the stabilization fund is meant for, so if you have a situation like that, then you can tap into that stabilization fund to level yourself out, to give you an opportunity to kind of regroup and get back on your feet. So it's a rainy day fund. It's meant for emergencies. It's meant for, and that's why they suggest to have
5
between
5
5
to
and
10%.
7%
Right.
of your
Yeah.
budget. So this way, if you have something unforeseen, you've got some money that you can continue, you know, educating the kids and continue to have your police force and not have to cut everything in half immediately. That you have money and then you have time to readjust. That's, you know, that's the stabilization fund.
Okay. If you don't mind, if I just add a little bit to that. One quick question, like a yes or no. If we're using like a stabilization account, a savings account, do we retain interest on the money in that account?
We
Yes.
definitely do.
Okay.
In the past, there hasn't been any, and that's really a bonus for us. Interest rates have gotten to a rational level now, 4 or 5%. So it actually would be generating something in terms of income. In the past, the rules were the same, but the rates were 0 or 0.1%.
Okay, so that makes a little more sense to me. And then I guess, you know, one of the definitions I saw in different towns, you know, they have definitions on the website for blurbs. One of them that I saw is an estimated revenue. This is for a stabilization fund for future needs to reduce the need of future tax increases by moderating revenue growth. That's not
No.
correct.
Correct.
That's not really
Right.
accurate.
No.
Well, let me explain. There's a new thing with stabilization, whereas we can set aside for a specific purpose this stuff. So if we know there's a roof that's going to need doing on a building and it's going to cost $1 million, we can set aside for that roof $250,000 a year for the next 4 years, and therefore avoid borrowing.
Mhm.
And we save all that interest and the expense of borrowing by doing that ahead of time. So right now we have 2 stabilization accounts, a general stabilization, which can be used for any purpose, and a capital stabilization. Our capital stabilization, I don't have my figures in front of me, but I want to say it's only about $50,000 in that. The rest of the money is in the general stabilization. We're looking into the idea of creating several other stabilization specific purpose accounts. For example, We have a couple of old loans that are out there that the money's sitting, once money's voted, it's voted for a purpose. And one of the purposes was the PCBs. We don't need it for that purpose anymore, but there's approximately $90,000, I believe, sitting in that account. We're looking at revoting that and putting it into possibly an account for school building maintenance. We have another account that's similar to that we're considering for town building maintenance. There's the fire department had their air packs. They ended up, we voted and did borrowing for that, or free cash for that they didn't use. So it's in an article fund.
Mhm.
And we're looking at transferring that. They ended up getting grant money, so they didn't use it. So
Right.
now we're looking at transferring that over to a truck that they're looking at, because to come up with 500,000 for a truck is a lot of money out of free cash. But if we transfer that over to a stabilization account for the truck, next year we can add another 250 to it from free cash and get the truck and not have to borrow.
Thank you. That was helpful, and it kind of changes my view on it now that I know we can be accruing interest on this money in the account. So that 1.5 seems a little bit better, because not only can we use it to budget and have it allocated for these things that we're looking at ahead of time, but it could also be bringing in revenue while it's in there. It's a vehicle. I get it.
Right. And if we can save the money on borrowing, our interest rate on borrowing is going up
Right.
considerably too. So we're saving a lot more there nowadays too, if we can plan ahead.
There's no question that that's a sound financial practice. Absolutely. It's just a tough sell. It's just a tough sell to ask people for additional money that we're saving, that we're tucking away. It just makes the conversation a little bit different than we normally would have thought that we were going to approach it. We just have a different motive now.
I think
Yeah,
that's why we need to have specific purposes. If they
Right.
understand it's for this purpose or that purpose that they're doing the saving for, they'll understand the need. But to say, oh, we just want a savings account, I don't think they'll understand it.
I think that you're right. There are two parts of it. You made a very good case. There is a reserve for a future project, which is designated for that. And that's for the fire engine or whatever. So we can explain that. And then there's the emergency fund, which is the standard traditional stabilization fund, which is for whatever comes down the pike. It's interesting that the world has returned to some sanity, because it used to be it costs you money to borrow, but you are making money on your savings, etc. For about 15 years, it was you don't make anything on your savings and it costs you nothing to borrow. We're back to sanity. And so if we don't have to borrow, we save money.
Okay.
So, okay, we've gone around in circles, right? So I'll just, reiterate whatever circle we conclude on. We need a plan. It needs to be a written plan. It needs to be this way. It, just like Susan said, it's a written plan. We can communicate it. And it needs to be agreed upon by all parties. And I think that's important.
I agree with you.
So, Shauna, do you
Can I
have?
just make a counterpoint to that?
Sure.
So I do want to establish I was on the finance committee for 5 years. I firmly believe in the policies that we put in place, not use free cash for operating budgets. And I know that I have violated that several times and violating it again this year. I like having a plan, but I think it makes a lot of sense for the reasons that you guys said, but there's two problems with it. One, you cannot commit future bodies to anything. And so I can't sign up for, I can say that I myself will support this plan for the next 5 years, but I can't say the select board is going to do that because I don't have any control over a future elected body. And the second thing is that all of these money decisions are made at town meeting. And so frankly, one of the reasons that I caved early on the free cash was that it was overwhelming that it was going to pass anyway. And so maybe it was political of me and I shouldn't have done it, but when you get so much support that town meeting is going to pass it anyway, it makes sense to plan for that to happen, right? So that it isn't just willy-nilly coming at you at town meeting, you can plan for it. So I have a plan. I hear you about the plan. I guess it's a matter of like, what level of commitment to the plan are we expecting? Because it's town meeting that votes on these things and it's future boards that we cannot guarantee will do any given thing. That's my concern with the plan.
And I respect that, and I understand from a legal standpoint, right? It's, it's not firm and binding, but I think we owe it. So yes, town meeting ultimately votes on it, but we have the responsibility to communicate what we believe makes the most sense. And here's a plan that the current town officials thought made sense. And this is what, and you can only hope that, future boards will continue to support it. And if they don't, the plan changes. But to say, well, town meeting does everything, I think that's a cop-out in terms of not wanting to present what we think is a fiscal responsibility. So I think we need to explain to the town, here's why we suggest what we're doing. Here's what we think is the plan, and hope that they support it. And I just don't agree with, well, it's town meeting, they can, do what you want. So what, I think we have that responsibility.
I agree with both you ladies. But the point is, we can't bind the future. However, everyone knows that. And so we can have a plan, which is what we think should be done over a period of time, which everyone knows, or we should point out, is subject to modification by those who are the operators in the future, but they don't have to be. We have a plan based upon what we believe of the present and projected circumstances. It's a projection. It doesn't bind people in the future because it can't, but it's still the best projection we can make of what we think should happen over time.
Fair enough.
We can bind our colleagues currently. There are no misunderstandings when it comes to town meeting.
Well, that's the idea of appropriating first before you go for the ballot, right? So that they know where the first year will happen.
Voters, and it's not a legally binding document, any of it, but it is a matter of commitment and morality. If people agree to do something, then that's important. But that's the current regime. That's not the future. And we can't find voters, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I look ahead, and if we have a plan that we all find reasonable and feel is the best plan, if a year or two down the road, something significant different is about to happen at town meeting, I want to be able to hold up the plan to say, this was our strategic plan. This is what we thought made sense, and this is what we still think makes sense. And so we're really going off the design of what the intent of what we're trying to do.
But to Shauna's point, three years from now, you could have a completely different school board, a completely different select board that says, no, this is why we wanted to get on this board, because we want to change that. We don't agree with that plan. So it's hard to build up credibility that we have no control over. We have no control over that.
No, we don't, but we have credibility now.
Right now, but to say that, to present that plan, we can't be accountable for that because we have no control over that future.
Cindy, there's a middle way. Karen has the plan. 3 years down the way, things have changed. There's no reason that the FinCom, whoever it may be, can say things have changed. We need to adapt the plan that we made 3 years ago because of circumstances.
Right. But that's
Or
just, that's
down in
exactly
flames
what the
because we shouldn't, but either way.
that's exactly what the naysayers will say. They'll say, oh, right, things change. You know, you told us back then this is what it was going to be. And yeah, now, yeah, it's changed. I mean, this is exactly what they're expecting. So
Well, that's
I'm just,
fair
I'm
enough,
just, I'm
because
just being
plans do
the devil's
change.
advocate here.
Plans have to change based
Right,
upon
right,
new
right.
facts, and there's no way to pretend that's not the case. So
Mhm.
that's a strength, not a weakness. We
My
can't
only
say that
point to
it's
that
the
is that
future.
we cannot stand behind a 5-year plan and say, this is what it's going to be. That's my
No.
only point to
Well,
that.
we can say this is our best projection of
Right.
which we think it will be.
Right. Right. We
And
can't
if
pledge
things
it.
change, we adapt it.
A
Right, we
plan
can't
is,
pledge
right.
it.
A plan is just a plan. A plan
Right.
is not,
Okay.
etched in stone. A plan is, there's a 5-year, there's a strategic thinking beyond it. And, that's why there's always rolling 5-year plans. Things change, estimates change, facts and circumstances come into play and that modify it. So it's not a 5-year plan that isn't adaptable, but it's coming up with, we're thinking ahead. We're not, I've said this before, and we all are so narrowly focused on the current year budget all the time and getting it to balance. And then we have tunnel vision to it. And then we get it to balance by using whatever methods we use, using free cash or whatever. And we go, yay, we did it. And then we move on to our day. And we're not thinking about a 5-year plan. We're not thinking about, well, what's next year going to look like? This was one-time revenues that came into free cash that's not going to repeat. We need to be thinking about those things in a plan. And
There
so-
is a 5-year plan already put on paper. I mean, we
Something
had
like
one,
that.
yeah, we had one done in that fiscal stability committee. Susan, what was the guy's name? The fellow who was the consultant in the collector's office.
Eric.
Eric.
Kinserf. Recently, just in the last 4 months, did a 5-year plan he did revenue and budgets, right, Susan?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
those need to be circulated to the select board and the finance committee if they're ready to be. So, we can start to look at those things.
Yeah.
Gary?
Yeah, so, this is all good conversation because I think this is something that we've probably had to do in a while. We haven't had the select board on in a while. Well, Sean on for a while. But, it's difficult because we want to make these budgets balanced. We don't want to raise tax more than what we should. But the most dangerous part is, I think, is to continue to use free cash. And here's the reason why, because now do we really know if the override should be 3 million, 2.5 million, 3.5 million? So leaving free cash out of the mix, we get a good sense of what the town really needs to support these budgets and going forward. And the only way, in my opinion, to see that is through fiscal forecasting. And I think you build fiscal flexibility when you do that, because we can prepare for those unknowns and adjust budgets accordingly as we go along. And I agree. I mean, we've been on this committee for a long time, most of us, and Shauna knows, and she's been, finance committee member, that, yeah, this is exactly what we do every single year. You could run these meetings 10 years ago, and we're talking about the next year's budget. No 5-year outlook, no 10-year outlook. I mean, 10 years is kind of extraordinary, but at least a 3-year outlook, so we know what the surprises will be. And I'm not talking about building a water sewer treatment plant. I'm talking about just funding the police department. I mean, we're not even talking about capital items. We're talking about fundamentally funding budgets that, if I ask anyone what the police budget would be the next 3 years, we wouldn't be able to have an answer to that. And that, to me, is the most dangerous part about going year to year in developing budgets, because we don't have that sense.
Can I address that, Karen?
Yes.
So part of the problem, Gary, is because we do not have enough money. Every year we are on a shoestring. Every year we're telling the departments level service, and then we say level fund, right? It's level fund or level service. So when we go ask the departments, think about what you really truly need, right? Like how much staff do you really need? What equipment do you really need? They don't tell us because they don't think it's the exercise is worth it because we won't follow it anyway. Like look at what we've done with public safety, right? For years, we've been talking about we need 4 more police officers, we need 4 more firefighters. That's all they asked for, really. And we can't even make that happen in the budget. So how are we going to convince them to be creative about telling us what you really need for capital purchases, for equipment, for training? Like we can't, we are so strapped that we're just thinking about it was like you're so poor that you have to feed yourself. You can't think about a new car. You have to feed yourself. So we can't get good projections about how much we really need because you've seen it. These departments don't make big asks because they know they're not going to get them anyway. So I don't know how you shift that mindset and say, no, make the big ask. We asked them to make the big ask and they can't or won't do it.
Yeah, I mean, no, I agree with you in a sense, but also part of demonstrating in a forecast is showing deficits and showing bottom line numbers that just maybe, and we're not saying they're not realistic because they're not asking for shiny fire trucks with chrome bumpers. They're asking for maybe labor. So it's okay to show a deficit. That to me demonstrates to the public that, yeah, we are in need. And if you show that deficit and you continue to show that deficit, I get they're only asking for what they want, but over a 5-year period, if you continue to show a deficit that's growing, something's got to give. And without that forecast, that to me is like, it's just out of sight, out of mind. I get that the departments are being very frugal. We know that 100%, and we support that. But at some point in time, we've actually have to demonstrate that on paper. And, plugging it with free cash to me is not only exacerbating that, it's not giving the true picture of what the deficit really is. And, it's difficult. I get it. It's not easy. And we don't want these departments to not be able to provide services to the community because people are so, they need their streets plowed, they need fire, they need police. It's just, we're at the point now, I think, that we really need to demonstrate this on paper.
Thanks, Gary. Zach?
So I think this will kind of tie in pretty good. Thinking about what you said, Shauna, I always had the habit walking in the house, opening up the fridge. My grandmother always used to say, if you don't know what you want, you're not hungry. The point of a plan, although this is a tough exercise, we need to know what we want. I think if we have an objective plan that makes sense and it's justified with projections, why do we need to worry who's going to be coming into office in 5 years, 10 years, 3 years? Maybe it makes more sense to have a 3-year plan. If in a hypothetical situation, if someone said to me right now, you'll have $3 million to spend tomorrow if you can give me a good reason now why you need to spend it, why you need it. I don't have an answer, or what I would say is I need more numbers to answer that question. So I just kind of wanted to add to the idea of a plan, and although it is kind of reaching, it's ultimately the substance to the conversations. It's the evidence. It's what we have to back up this override if it's truly needed. And this exercise should show it. I'd be interested to see the task force 5-year plan that they put together with their consultant.
I will dig that up and forward it along.
We have one in place.
The one that
Kinserf,
exists, yeah.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
Kinserf did one back in it's like September, October of 2022 when we first started the fiscal stability group in this latest phase. Bay Coast Bank was kind enough to pay for the accountant accountant to do up the plan.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you know, I mean, I'm Shauna probably remembers, and I'm sure everybody that's on the committee here, but Tim King, not that I want to put more pressure on the town administrator, but he actually, I mean, it wasn't pretty, but he actually did a forecast, a 5-year forecast, because we had asked him for that. And it kind of like just never happened again. It just, after he left, it fell apart. Not fell apart, but, and we had charged them to do that. I think through the select board had asked them for that, if I remember.
I just forwarded to Karen and Cindy, because I had their emails available, that forecast. So they can forward it to everybody else.
Great, thank you.
Good.
Shauna, has the select board been presented that plan? Have you seen that as a select board? Has that come to your way?
You're talking about, so certainly the 5-year revenue projection plan. Yes, I have absolutely, I'm looking at that one right now. If you're talking about the expenses, I've only seen tables that are just like growing at 2.5% or something like that. There probably is. I get a lot of material. I don't.
Right. Okay.
I think,
well,
but I'm pretty sure we did see the plan that I've seen a lot of different versions of the plan. I guess is my point. Like I've seen too many versions of the plan. It's like this, like the override options. I am probably the most confused person about the override options there are, because I've seen like 100 versions of it, but I can't get some good guidance about which version to go with.
Right. So, right. So the finance committee hasn't seen the 5-year plan that was done by Eric. So that's great. So it'll come our way and we'll forward that along. So thank you. And then we can look at that. I guess the question becomes, is how comprehensive is it? So is it something that we can really use as a tool for education and justifying the override now? Or is that just, too much information and too little time to kind of process that out?
There's a lot of information in that forecast. Many tabs. It's an Excel spreadsheet with many tabs. You can actually change numbers to see, and it will affect all the other spreadsheets and so forth. So it's pretty involved.
Is there like a lead sheet? Because a fiscal forecast should only be on one sheet. It should project all the revenues, the tax levy, the overlay, everything, and then the bottom should be all the expenses. So at the very bottom, you're going to get either you have a deficit or you have a surplus. I don't know. I mean, I'd have to look at it. I don't know what it looks like, but something as simple as that goes 5 years out will show, I'm sure, a deficit in every single year with a level funded budget and no use of free cash. So I'd be interested to look at it.
Yeah.
I can put it in the drive, Karen.
Oh, we will, and we'll email it.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get it in the drive.
Yeah. Susan, just real quick, I don't want to spend too much time on something we haven't seen, but did he make assumptions that were realistic, or did he create a model for us to then pump in numbers? Like, did he
use some assumptions that we had given him? Say, I'm trying to think what we used for assuming salary increases and things of that nature. And the rest of it is, we can just put in numbers. Or if we know that the salary increases, if we need to increase it from 2% to 4%, we can do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So Shauna, how else can we frame our guidance?
I think we need a $3 million override all up front. I know Gary doesn't like it, but the best I can come up with is we take a 1.5 million, 5446 and split it up, and then a 1.5 for, I would suggest actually capital stabilization and regular stabilization, but maybe we put some in OPEB. Like, I don't know what the number is. The school, this is the problem that I thought about when Hugh was talking about, right? We've had this 54-46 split in a long time, because absent anything else, this is what we came up with. But I think that the rate of the school need is growing at a higher rate than the town need. And a lot of it has to do with what's a town cost and then school cost, because The town side actually supports a lot of school stuff. So I think part of the problem with having a plan, I mean, it's good because at least we said, hey, we have nothing better to budget with, so let's use 5446. I don't know how often we read. I don't even know how old that is. It's very old.
Well,
But-
the schools actually, they take exception to it sometimes because I know that Nancy has mentioned in more than one meeting that people will say to them, well, look, you're more than 50% of the town budget, you're allocated 54%. And in fact, they're not. I mean, if you really
Oh.
allocate all of the things, that maybe the town supports the school budget with, maybe it comes out to that. But they actually don't like this, publicized 54-46 split because it makes their portion of the budget look bigger than
Well, and then they don't
financially,
like
it-
the other version, which would be we
Yeah.
actually show which town side costs are actually
Right.
school costs, right?
Right.
The health insurance and the pension
Exactly.
and
Retirement,
and
sure.
the accounting office. Like we're holding school costs over in the town.
I
side, too.
agree.
So they probably don't like it very much. But
They
that's
don't
why-
want that
that's why
included.
the
Right.
5446 is like it's hard because I said I think that their expenses are growing faster, and it's not mismanagement. I think it's that they have more student fluctuation. They have more their unfunded mandates that are coming to them. I think schooling is different than it was 10 years ago. And so I don't know.
Well,
I don't know what the
something-
right number is.
Something was pointed out to me this week that I have to say that I took exception with at first because I didn't think that it was true. I thought there was an incorrect number. And then I went back and I looked at it. From 2017 to the current date, their salary figure, now keep in mind, their enrollment was down 25% from their top peak at that same time. So from the time that the new school was announced and the shift of students and they saw a big drop in student enrollment, their salary increase is less than 2% for instruction. Instructional salaries, including special ed and regular instruction. If you go back and look there, and I went through the numbers myself because I didn't think that it was true. It's still they still carry only about 12 million plus in actual instruction salary. So their budget has kind of ballooned a little bit, but as a percentage of other town budgets, their budget actually has not grown that much. If you go and do the number is big because they have a big budget. But on a compounding basis, going back 7 years, their budget really has not grown that much. And I was surprised. I'm going to be the first one to admit that I was surprised how much restraint there actually had been in the numbers. Their numbers look big because their base is so big. And so it always takes up a big chunk of what we have. But they have been pretty much held to a relatively small percentage increase, even including the free cash allocations the last 3 years. Their increases have been actually relatively small compared to a lot of other budgets. I was surprised. Shauna, do you think that's true? Shauna?
I looked at the analysis the same way that you
Yeah.
have, but I'm not surprised actually. They're on a shoestring just like we are.
Right.
But also this is like you talk about what's our plan. Like I would love to, I want to get this salary survey done so that
Right.
we can, because I believe the town side employees across the board are underpaid.
Yeah.
And like, so this is where when Hugh, I know Hugh for many years, you're trying to protect the town side because our town, we're underpaid, we're understaffed because our pay is so low. We can't get people with hoisting licenses and CDLs because our pay is too low. Why in the world would they come work for us? Our benefits are not that great. I know people think, oh, union, your benefits are
Right.
awesome. Our benefits are not that good.
Right.
So like, I absolutely 100% think we need to protect the town side of the budget because
Mhm.
the town also has needs, but I think it's not proportional. I don't think it's a 54-46 proportion. And maybe Hugh, you kind of called it like a true up and maybe like a one-time true up to get it right and then keep going. Maybe that's the answer.
Mhm.
But I was going to say, I don't disagree with anything you're saying. But part of it is that the facts are facts, but sometimes perceptions are more important than facts.
Mhm.
And the perception in many places around the town and so forth is that the schools get all the money and get the raises. If, I don't know how many people focus on the 5446, but if there were perception that the figure for the school is going higher, that would be a death knell for the override. Because it would just confirm the idea that the schools get but not be true. But perceptions, the schools get everything and the town employees don't. And if that were part of the override, that would be it, in my view anyway. So we need to keep that balance in place.
Well, there's certainly a demographic shift too that's taken place. I mean, over time. I mean, what is it? 40% of the residents, the taxpayers in town, are over the age of 55. So, those are the people that don't have school-age children. So that number is going to continue to grow. And the school numbers have declined. They're bouncing back. They are starting to bounce back somewhat, but they had declined significantly. I mean, their enrollment was down 25%. I mean, they had a graduating class of 48 a couple of years ago. 48.
Wow.
Those are the numbers from the 1950s, for crying out loud. I mean, 48 is pretty low.
Yeah.
Which makes you think that the whole operation should be smaller if that's the size of what you're instructing.
But
I'm
you
not
still
trying to-
have to have a class, whether there are 3 kids
Yeah,
in
I'm
it
not
or
trying
there are
to
13.
challenge the budget. I'm just saying that's part of the same perceptions we're talking
Yeah.
about.
Oh, yeah. It's a perception issue. There's no question about that. No question about that.
Go ahead, Sue.
Cindy, I gotta talk to you on those numbers. I ran a lot of those numbers through the payroll system,
Right.
and I'm not seeing
I
the
went by the annual report. Okay, so I did what was posted as expended for salaries, instructional salaries, in the annual report.
yeah,
And special ed salaries in the annual report.
I went
thought the
through,
numbers incorrect.
yeah, I don't know what's in the annual report. I actually used the payroll, what was actually paid out for the school in 2017 for the count. I had to use complete calendar year, so I used calendar year 2017 and calendar year 2022 and came up with drastically different numbers.
But did you separate out instruction versus administration?
Excuse me. No, but it's
Okay,
easy enough
I'm
to
talking
do.
about strictly instruction.
That's easy enough to do with these, the way
Yeah.
it's by category, so it specifies whether it's teacher,
Okay.
administration, etc.
Well, I used what was publicly available. And
Yeah.
and I came up with the same numbers, which I was kind of surprised that they were as low as they were, but which
Yeah.
which is a little bit of a segue into if we were to pass an override, my first $100,000 goes to a revamp of the town website. I'll tell you, you try finding anything on that website. So right now, for example,
Second.
I was curious what was on, what information was available about Diamond. So just now, I did it just now too. You go to the splash page of the town website and it says, what are you looking for? What, the little blue box, the search box. I put in Diamond. I get like a report from the Diamond superintendent from 2016. That's it. There's nothing about the Diamond vote that anyone could find on this website. I don't know where they would look. Most people use search to find it. If you're looking for the annual town report, if you go to historical documents where all the other town reports are, it only goes to 2018. But if you go to the Board of Selectmen, their pocket of annual reports includes through 2020. So something isn't being caught to catch and flag things, to put them in multiple places. But there isn't a single thing on the website that I could find about the Diamond vote.
Well,
I'm not going to
without-
disagree with you, but I was just going to tell you, look at your information technology department budget.
Oh, I know.
Anything happening on that town website is people like strapped employees who are
Yep.
really busy with other stuff having to do it, because we are very much at risk from our information technology. This is actually an area that's a very good example. We have outdated software, we have outdated equipment, that we have equipment that we can't install. we are at risk. We have a really good bargain with the employee that we have right now. If he leaves, it would really hurt us a lot. So what you're saying is just one more thing. Is
Oh,
like,
I know. That's why
but people are trying really hard to make that
Yeah.
website
Well,
work.
it's a catch-22, right? So I think, having accurate information, having information that's available to the public is all very important things and speaks to transparency. And speaking to transparency speaks to integrity and credibility of the town officials, right? And so when you don't have that, it's easy to think the opposite when it's not necessarily true. It's just where everybody's strapped and just don't have the ability to do the things. But the perception is, oh, they're hiding things. Look at this. Look at this. I can't find this. I can't get this. And so, it's a good $100,000 spent probably, right, to kind of upgrade or whatever it is. But having the information and having it accurate is really important. And whatever story it is we're trying to tell, we need the data and it needs to be correct.
And it needs to be accessible. I mean, that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Accessible, that people need to be able to find it easily to garner some of this information. I mean, it's so frustrating trying to find much information on there that's current. I mean, boards, have minutes from 2016 or whatever on there being the last thing that's been posted.
So just to I don't want to digress too much further here, but so in terms of the fiscal 24 budget, I have made requests to both the town and then Michelle over at the school, because I think we ought to see what's built into fiscal 24 into gross salary increases. So I want to see that the town employees average X percent, the school employees average X percent. We need, we need to see that, whatever number that is. I'm trying to get it on a big basis so we can understand that. So, the town residents deserve to know that. And if it's, and make whatever judgment they want, but if town employees or school employees are getting an average of 2%, then that's also a subject for discussion, that the inflation that's going on, a 2% raise is a negative for people. So, but not making any judgments to it, but we just ought to have the facts of this is what is built into the budget, like it or not, but that's what's in the budget. So I'm trying to get that information. So go ahead, Hugh.
I just got to say, but the other part of it is the entire budget, not just the percentage increase individually, because you look at the highway department, whatever, the percentages are there are fewer people. And that's where the difference comes to some extent. We're squeezing. Anyway, I think I enjoyed the conversation, but I think we're going round and round in circles. And I might spend the rest of the night talking about these things. Do you think we could come to some conclusions before we decide to terminate the meeting?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and our second part of the meeting is to discuss the budget further. So once we're done with this topic. So Shauna, do you need anything else from us on the override, or do we have anything else that we need to?
Like a number. Tell me the number. Tell me the number. Tell me how much stabilization. Tell me how you think I should divide it up. And I know you probably don't all agree. Like I said, I keep flip-flopping myself, but like you can talk about, we're not sharing information, but I put a number on a budget in a week. And so in 1 week, I need to put a number on a warrant article, and maybe we draft 2 warrant articles and with 2 different versions. But if you all have a version that you like, then share it, because I really do need input.
Okay. So what I'll ask the committee to do, anybody that's interested, if you could email me directly what your thoughts are, if you have some specific ideas on a $3 million override, and sketch it out. And then I'll be happy to kind of summarize that, and and then I'll forward that along to you, Shauna. So this way we can get whatever consensus that somebody's willing to put on paper for us.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
We're gonna stick around for a little bit.
Stick around,
Yeah.
absolutely. So the other topic for us to discuss is the fiscal 24 budget. So as we know, the select board approved their version of the budget and sent that over to us. And so now it's time for the finance committee to prepare its own budget or take that budget and modify it in any ways that we feel appropriate to put our draft version together. So I'm looking for, I'd be happy to crunch the numbers once I get some guidance from everyone, but I think we have certainly with the new state aid number from the governor's office, we can certainly pump that through if everyone feels that that's appropriate. And in the traditional sense of that incremental revenue, that would, if it had come from the town administrator to us in that fashion. So if the numbers had been released, it would be that incremental revenue would be 54% school, 46% town. Does anyone have any, first, does everyone want that revenue to be in this budget at this time? And then how does everyone feel about an allocation of that?
I would speak for myself, say yes. Everything we do in a budget is an estimate. It always has been. And so there's no reason not to use the estimate that we think is a pretty good one for the state contribution, the increased state contribution. So I'm all in favor of that.
Okay, thank you.
I agree. You know, if Karen, if you wanted to temper it a little bit, I mean, I think I had done the same math that Shauna had, and when I mentioned 400, I was kind of tempering it a little bit. So, I mean, if you wanted to use 500 or 450 instead of the whole 568 or whatever it is, I mean, that's fine too. But I feel that it's a safe number. I mean, if that cherry sheet estimate had come out with those numbers initially, that's what it would be. It's always an estimate. So I feel comfortable with that.
Okay. All right, I don't feel the need to temper it. Either it is or it isn't. So go ahead, Gary.
So, just to recap, the plan is to, I guess the suggestion from the select board was to use 563,000.
No,
Oh.
500.
That was just Shauna, not the
Oh,
select
okay.
board.
500,000. And, we see that state aid has been increased a little bit. So in essence, we're really not using free cash. We're using available funds that we're projecting for Chapter 70 money, basically. Is that kind of a summary?
No, I'm not sure what you mean.
So new state aid has come in. We have new numbers for state aid.
Right.
Yep,
We're increasing our projections by 400,000. Is that correct?
562.
Okay, 562. So the recommendation was that initially we use 500,000 of free cash to supplement the budget for fiscal 24. But now that we have new numbers from state aid, chapter 70, I guess, we're in essence using, I mean, I don't know if we determined that yet. Are we in essence using the new chapter 70 numbers to fund it? Or are we still using, what's the funding source, I guess? Is it still free cash? Is that what's on the table?
No, Karen is suggesting that the 562 incremental increase in state aid would be split 54-46. So only 54% of that new additional amount would get allocated to the schools.
And how much is that? Do we know? 400?
Yeah, it's
300,000, say.
300.
Say it again, Kim. 300? Okay. So that's what the proposal is.
Well, that's what we're trying to determine. So again, if a week ago those numbers were released, that's how it would have been flown through the budget, right? And so I think, you got to flow through, in my opinion, you flow through it traditionally and consistently the way you would. And then secondly, you look at free cash to supplement something, but it gets,
Mhm.
and to your point earlier, Gal, you got to know what it really is to really then base where the gap really is. And so I don't want to hide the gap by not doing something traditionally that
Yeah.
is consistent with what we're doing. So by having said that, I would say you would take the, just like we would do, you would take the extra 562 in revenue, would be split 54-46. That gives 300,000 more to the school and than they had initially. And then now, secondly, then we can analyze the need for free cash beyond what the traditional budget for recurring operating expenses are.
Okay.
That's what I would
Yeah, okay,
suggest.
so that's a good synopsis.
Right.
Last week, or I don't know if it was last week or the week before, I had asked about motor vehicle receipts and what the revenue projection was for that. Do we have any kind of idea of what we've budgeted and what we're actually, what the first commitment was? I mean, do we kind of have a sense, Sue? Or somebody, I don't know.
I don't know what figure Jim used.
We don't know what was budgeted. Yeah.
No.
So Jim, maybe Gary, maybe you can touch base with Jim.
Yeah, because I would say that if that needs to be tweaked, that might be the bridge between the 300,000 and, I mean, it's cutting it close. I get it, but you know, that might be the bridge between the extra 100 and some thousand that we need to allocate here for to make up the 500,000 that the board of selectmen is maybe, promoting as far as giving them for the next fiscal year's budget. Unless we just want to settle with the 300 and whatever, I don't know.
Well, I guess I'm asking the question to the group, right? So the select board had 500,000 of free cash in there. If the new revenue from the state aid is 300,000 coming to them, would then for right now, I know you're talking maybe other revenue sources could help, but then would we then switch the free cash to 200,000? So to keep the 500,000 committed, 300 from recurring revenue sources and 200 from free cash? Is that?
Yeah, that would be my suggestion. I feel a little bit more comfortable that we actually using a projection that's coming in from state aid than using the entire amount coming from free cash. Because of what we've talked about in the past, not to regurgitate the whole thing again, but I feel comfortable with that scenario that Karen just demonstrated.
Yeah. I would join Gary. I think that's right, because it also shows the allocation on a traditional basis and then fills in the gap with free cash. So that's good.
So, okay, anybody else on?
I have just one question on the cherry sheets. I didn't take a good look at them, but I thought a certain amount of that increase was Chapter 70
90?
anyway,
Oh, okay.
and a certain amount was UGA, unrestricted government aid.
Yeah.
Well, but we take the total amount of additional revenue and split it 54-46, regardless of what the purpose of the funding was from the state. So if the additional amount was Chapter 70, or if it was Chapter 90, or if it was, maybe state-owned land, maybe we got a big windfall from that. Schools would still get 54 and Townside would still get 46, regardless of what the source is.
Oh, because I know when it comes in from the state, it gets credited to the accounts. Like if it's Chapter 70, it goes to the schools. It's designated as that. If it's
but their budget is 20 million, so money is fungible. So I mean, they have a $20 million budget. We don't get 20 million in state aid. So whatever amount goes to them, we're just talking about allocating the total. They would always get their education money because their total budget is so big.
okay.
Can I move the question?
So my next question. So I think so I understand where we're going here. So now of the back to the 562,000 of incremental revenue from the state. So 54% goes to the school, but 46% goes to the town. So that's, 260,000. Do we want to do anything in the budget with that 260? Because now,
Well,
There's-
is the town administrator preparing, an alternative budget for that, Shauna? Does the select board have areas where they wanted to increase? I know this is new information to you, so,
So we have, I mean, the select board hasn't met.
Yeah.
Shauna
Right.
Schufeld thinks
No,
we should
right.
just displace the free cash. So you guys are talking about a different approach. Totally fine. Our submitted budget has what we think our numbers need to be for the town
Okay.
side. Like, so my personal suggestion would be, the town administrator does not have time to be able to, I mean, he'll help support whatever he wants to do, but we have to get the warrant now. The warrant has to come out, we don't have that long to go. You have to finalize the warrant, right? But maybe you put it in a reserve fund, maybe you put it in OPEB. I think we cut OPEB. So I think if you're going to distribute the town money that way, absent a better suggestion from the town administrator, I think you just have to put it in the reserve or OPEB or something. I don't think we have time to figure out, like, if we have another $100,000, where is it going to go? Unless the town administrator has that, like, off the top.
Right.
Then.
right.
there were two positions, right, Karen, that were kind of significantly cut back. One was, well, in addition to positions in the past, like highway, fire, one was the assistant building inspector that we bring up every single year. Some years it's been funded and then not filled, and then other years not funded. And then the other one was cutting back the hours of the animal control officer, right? That they went to only one single person versus having an additional part-time person.
Yeah, we
Those
cut the
two that
part-time
stick out.
person.
Pardon me?
We cut the part-time person in this
Right.
budget.
Right. So those are the only two things that really stick out in my mind, personnel wise anyway. We trimmed fuel and oil all over the place, but those are the only two significant position areas that I recall were, because the town budgets, I mean, they always come in skinny. I mean, they're used to that drill. Whatever we had last year, keep it the same. I mean, they are used to that drill. So we lost, there she is. So I mean, those are two areas that I recall. I know we're talking about what, 250,000, give or take. Those are the two areas that I recall that we had cut back or had been cut back from previous years.
Yeah, well, what we can do in this draft, I can run these through pretty easily. The 262 can right now just drop to a surplus, and then we have a little time
Right.
to
Okay.
think it through. So
Good.
I guess what I would encourage us to do, though, is to think it through pretty quickly, because I think the only thing at this point now, if we're comfortable that the governor's budget is pretty solid, then I think we're just waiting on the Diamond and Bristol Aggie assessments. Then we can go ahead and actually fine tune and finalize this budget pretty soon. So, because the sooner we are able to finalize it, the sooner the 24-page report can get out and published, and people can start to see where we are fiscally, and so that starts the process on the need for an override. So we've got plenty of time, but I don't want to sit on this too long. So we have, a firefighter is an option, the animal control is an option, a highway department is an option, or doing nothing with positions and putting some more to OPEB is also a very good option. Any thoughts from anyone?
I would vote for putting it to OPED or something rather than fiddling at the last minute with things. I'm favorable if replacing people that we should have, but I think it's getting a little late in the game to redo budgets.
Okay, I can do that in this round.
We can always have a second thought after
Yep.
next round comes.
Yep, absolutely. It's just still a draft, so I'll punch these numbers through. So when shall we meet again?
Well, I think we need to go back to what, Zach's initial point was, and that is, coming up with this number and then coming up with, the plan of attack, so to speak. So I think we need to focus on that. There's a candidates night next Wednesday. I believe that and this is just my recollection, that the fiscal stability group is going to be present at the candidates night next week. So, so you're going to have other factions here talking about overrides. So I think now we're going to end up in getting into some dangerous territory to make sure that the word kind of gets out there consistently with the same message. Not that any one group controls the other, that of course, but they're ready to start getting out there and educating and advocating and getting the word out. So they're not really sure what the number should be either. I think they're probably going to focus more on the need more than the how, but more on the need. So I'm just saying that they're going to be out there next week. That'll be next Wednesday, and things will start, I think, to filter out. I am still shocked that, the social media issues have been so quiet on this whole subject, but I don't know if that's because the admins of some of these sites have squashed them. I have no idea, but it just seems that social media has been very, very quiet. You get a few little chirps here and there, but last year there was a lot more noise about override talk.
Early, right? It's
Yeah, I
too
guess
early.
it's early.
So
It
here's
seems
what
like it's been a long time to me.
Here's what I'd like to do if our schedules work. I would like to have a meeting next week, and I would like us to look at kind of what I put together in the override plan and some ideas and educational materials. And I put some people's names next to things with question marks. And I'd like us all to commit to some tasks, because as much as the fiscal stability group is going to help in terms of preparing materials or doing whatever it is they're doing, we have a responsibility as a finance committee to educate the public, right? So we have to come up with our own materials so that we can get those out there, because those are official materials. So we need to break things up and get some help. So I'm going to start working on the 24-page report, which might be 26 pages or who knows. I'm going to try not to have it go too much bigger, but so I'm going to start working on that. And so I really could use other committee members to start working on kind of some override materials, some educational materials, things that Zach has been talking about, what is Prop 2.5, what is a stabilization fund, what is, and we need to do those sort of things as part of the presentation materials. And so I'm going to be asking for full participation by other members to help do some things.
And Zach, I have to point out, I think that your insight to this and your contribution to this is very important, because as we've stated here earlier, many of us have been kind of immersed in this for years. And so we have become accustomed to a lot of things, whether it be jargon or process or whatnot, that we take for granted that other people may or may not know, or we forget that people may not be as aware of how certain things work. So you coming in with, a little bit less of that time committed to this, and having predetermined biases about certain things that we've all developed over the years is extremely helpful. So, I always like to approach things as if I know nothing, and what do I need to know if I know nothing? So I think your approach to this is really important, so that we understand what people don't know, and how to explain it to them, what makes sense to them. So I think it'll be very helpful having you participate to the extent that you can.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And hopefully it was just good timing and meant to be. And
Good. Good.
It was a workout for, a value to the entire town.
Good.
Great, thank you. Shauna, do you see, I've seen in other towns, as they're preparing for an override, that they've had kind of a town hall kind of question and answer session with a couple of select board members, a couple of, finance committee members. Do you see that of value? Do you see that being successful, where we'd either have a meeting or have it in person, but then maybe remote, so someone doesn't need to?
I think it would be incredibly valuable, yes, but I haven't seen anybody plan it yet.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
I do want to remind people, April 11 has an important financial question on it that will impact the budget. So please make sure we're getting the word out about the April 11 question about Diamond.
But how is that information being disseminated? I mean, I know it's early. We still have what?
Well, I know they're going to
before
talk
the
about
election.
it. I believe they're going to talk about it at the candidates night on March
Good.
8th. And I believe that some of the Diamond supporters are going to be sharing it on social media, things like that. So I believe that there's an advocacy group now talking about it.
Good. Right. Because as far as the Diamond people are concerned, I mean, they got their job done, because either way, it's going to get paid. So their incentive has kind of faded to, they feel we've already committed. So what's the big deal? So
I think
I
that
hope
might
they
be
turn
true,
out.
like in theory, but I think that a lot of them are really committed to making
Good.
sure Diamond isn't like the one is like our whole budget's ruined because of Diamond. Like
Good.
that's not good for them either.
Good.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, anyone? Oh, we got to approve the minutes. Hold on.
One quick thing just to
Go ahead.
add, when it comes to the question and answer, remote or in person, I think when it comes to any type of education on any topic, redundancy is key. We just need to repeat, and we need to try different forms, different methods, different venues, different people,
Zach, I would add something from my experience many years ago in the Navy. For public speaking, the issue was tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them you told them. That's exactly what you're saying.
And tell them again.
And tell them again,
Yeah,
right?
Like an essay, right?
Right. Right. They say it takes 3 times to say something before someone even absorbs it. But you're right. I mean, every whatever it is that we do, whatever material that gets published, you have to assume that's the only material somebody's seeing. You can't assume somebody has prior knowledge, right? So whatever we do for a meeting needs to be comprehensive enough that you can't assume that somebody has read that or seen that or done that. And so redundancy will be really redundant to us, but yes, we have to do that. So you're right, Zach. You're right, Hugh. Okay, so if nothing else, we'll meet next week. And if we have the minutes of February 21, 2023, if everyone has had a chance to read those, does anyone want to make a motion to approve them?
So move. Second.
Yep, second. Yeah.
Any discussion on them? Nope. I'll go for a roll call. Hugh,
Hugh Morton, aye.
Cindy,
Aye.
Zach,
Aye.
Gary,
Yes.
and Karen, I thank you. I have nothing else. And so looking for a motion to adjourn.
Oh, boy. So moved. Motion to
Okay.
adjourn.
All right, Hugh,
Aye.
Cindy,
Aye.
Zach,
Aye.
Gary.
Yes.
And before I say yes, thank you, Shauna, for coming. Much appreciated, your presence.
Actually, I have one question for Shauna before
yeah,
she goes.
whoops.
When
won't-
are
I
you
won't
going to
vote.
when are you going to close the warrant?
I don't remember. Oh no, we're closing the warrant on the 6th.
On the 6th, okay. Just so we'll see that the week after, 10 days after, we'll see the articles.
We'll send
Okay.
you the draft and all the financial information
Great.
like right after the 6th. But
Great.
you might not get the final versions of all the wording and everything, but you'll get the financial parts for sure.
Great. Good.
Thank you again, Shauna, and I will vote aye. So that's it. Good
Aye.
night.